The morning my granddaughter asked me if she was invisible. I was standing at the kitchen sink washing a coffee mug I had already washed twice. I wasn't thinking about the dishes. I was thinking about the look on her face the night before. That particular stillness a child gets when she's decided that crying won't help, that no one is coming, that she just has to sit with whatever this is and be quiet about it. She was 6 years old. She shouldn't know how to do that yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what my late husband used to say whenever I started a story from the middle. He was right, and I miss him for it, among other things. My name is Dorothy Keane. I am 54 years old. I live in Sudbury, Ontario. In the same house I moved into the year my daughter Lily was born, which was also the year I stopped sleeping through the night and started drinking my coffee before it was done brewing. I am a retired administrative coordinator for the Sudbury District Health Unit. 31 years, 2 union contracts, 1 supervisor I genuinely liked. I am a widow. I am a grandmother. And until about 18 months ago, I was also, without knowing it had a name, the family's designated soft place to land. What I mean by that is this. I was the one who said yes, always, without condition, without calculation, without ever once sitting down and asking myself what this was costing me. When my son-in-law Terrence lost his job and couldn't cover the mortgage, I lent them $11,000. When my brother Alistair's truck broke down for the 3rd time and he needed to get to work, I drove 40 minutes each way, twice a day for 6 weeks. When my younger sister Maureen decided to go back to school at 47 and needed someone to watch her kids after school 3 days a week, I was there. With snacks on the table and homework spread across the kitchen counter before her car had even pulled out of the driveway. I didn't do these things grudgingly. That's important to say. I did them because I love my family and because helping felt like the right thing to do. But there is a difference between choosing to give and being expected to give, and somewhere along the way, I couldn't tell you exactly when the choice had disappeared. Helping wasn't something I did, it was something I was. My daughter Lily has been married to Terrence for 9 years. They have 1 child, a girl named Wren. Wren is 6 now, going on about 45. With her father's serious eyebrows and her mother's habit of chewing the end of her braid when she's thinking hard about something, she is the best thing in my life, and I mean that without any sentimentality at all. I mean it as a simple fact. The way you'd say, the sky is gray in November, or that Tim Hortons coffee is never quite as good when you make it yourself at home. Terrence has a sister named Pauline. Pauline is 3 years younger than him, and she has 2 children of her own. A boy named Hudson, who is 8, and a girl named Ivy, who is 10. Terrence and Pauline are close in the way that siblings can be close when one of them has always been the favorite. Though it took me years to see it that way. His parents Gordon and Sylvia, wait, I need to stop. I need to use different names. I'll call them Reg and Diane. Terrence's parents, Reg and Diane Calloway, retired schoolteachers from Barrie, who drove up to Sudbury 4 or 5 times a year and always stayed in our spare room and always left a slightly too small thank you gift on the kitchen counter on their way out. A box of crackers, a jar of jam with the lid that didn't quite seal, once, memorably, a single scented candle from a gas station in Parry Sound that smelled like someone had tried to make a forest out of cleaning products. I never said anything. Dorothy doesn't say anything. Dorothy smiles and says it was so nice having you and means it, mostly. The Christmas in question was 2 years ago. Lily and Terrence hosted, which they did every other year at our place, alternating with Pauline and Terrence's parents, hosting at Reg and Diane's in Barrie. This was our year. Lily had been planning since October. She gets that from me, the early planning, the obsessive list-making. She'd ordered a fresh turkey from the market on Frood Road, made the cranberry sauce herself from scratch, with oranges and a cinnamon stick, and spent an entire Saturday afternoon with Wren, cutting snowflakes out of white paper and taping them to the living room windows. I came over 2 days early to help. I brought my good stock pot, 3 pounds of butter, and a pecan pie I'd been practicing since September, because Wren had asked for it, specifically after seeing it on a baking show. Wren called it the fancy pie with the crunch on top, and she had been asking about it since Thanksgiving. Pauline arrived on Christmas Eve afternoon, with Hudson and Ivy and 3 suitcases, and a hamper from a specialty shop in Barrie that had obviously cost a great deal of money and contained items no one in Sudbury actually eats. including something called truffle salt, and a box of rice crackers with flavors I couldn't pronounce. Reg and Diane drove up separately and arrived around 4. The house was full and warm, and it felt, briefly, exactly the way Christmas is supposed to feel. The gifts were under the tree by 7. I noticed that Pauline's contribution to the pile was substantial. She's always been generous. I'll give her that. Reg and Diane had brought a bag from one of the department stores in Barrie, which I also noticed was not small. I had brought Wren's gifts wrapped in the red paper she had picked out at Staples in early November and hidden under my coat so she wouldn't see them on the way in. I also brought gifts for Hudson and Ivy. Because of course I did. I'm Dorothy. Dorothy brings gifts for everyone. Christmas morning. Wren was up before 6. She had slept in her own room, with the door cracked open, so she could hear if anyone came downstairs. And I know this because I had slept in the guest room and I was awake too, listening to the particular quiet of a house where a child is pretending to sleep. She came and knocked on my door at 5:53. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone. She stood in the doorway in her reindeer pajamas with her braid half undone and said, "Grandma, do you think it's been long enough?" I told her we had to wait until 7. She sat on the end of my bed and we waited together, and she told me very seriously that she hoped Santa had remembered the science kit she asked for at the mall in October, the one with the test tubes and the little safety goggles. I told her I thought he probably had. She asked me how I knew. I told her Santa and I had an understanding. She considered this and then nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. We all gathered in the living room at 7:15. Lily made coffee. Terrence found a Christmas playlist on his phone that was about 60% Elvis, which is his thing. Not anyone else's thing. But no one said anything because it was Christmas, and Terrence is fundamentally a decent man who just has very strong feelings about Elvis at the holidays. The gift opening started around 8, after breakfast. Hudson and Ivy went first, as they often did. They were older and also somehow always slightly faster to the pile. Reg and Diane had brought them each a gift card to a sporting goods chain, some books, and a large boxed set of art supplies that Ivy had apparently asked for. Pauline gave them both gifts as well. A video game for Hudson and a jewelry-making kit for Ivy that came in a shiny box with a purple lid. Then it was Wren's turn. From Pauline, a coloring book. A nice coloring book, certainly the thick kind with the detailed pictures. But just the one item, and no colored pencils included. Wren held it in her lap and looked at the cover and said thank you very nicely. And I watched her eyes move to the pile of gifts that had just been opened for Hudson and Ivy, and then back to the coloring book, and then to me. From Reg and Diane, a gift card. $25 to a bookstore chain, slipped inside a small envelope with a card that had a reindeer on it and was signed, "Merry Christmas. Love Grandma and Grandpa," in Diane's tidy schoolteacher handwriting. And that was it. I sat with my coffee getting cold in my hands and I counted what I was seeing. Hudson and Ivy had received, between them, well over $300 in gifts from Terrence's parents and sister combined. Wren had received a coloring book with no pencils and a $25 gift card. I thought, maybe there's something else coming. I thought, maybe they're saving something for later. I thought because Dorothy always thinks this first. Maybe I'm reading this wrong. Lily caught my eye from across the room. Her expression was careful and still. She was doing the same math I was. Wren didn't say anything. She opened the rest of her gifts. The science kit was there, from under the tree, from Lily and Terrence and me. And she lit up in the genuine, fizzing way children do when they get the exact thing they hoped for. She put the safety goggles on immediately and wore them for the rest of the morning, including during breakfast. So in that way, it was a good Christmas morning. It was. But around noon, when things had settled, and the wrapping paper had been gathered and the leftovers were already happening, I found Wren sitting by herself on the bottom step of the stairs, with the coloring book open on her knees. She was looking at one of the pictures, an intricate garden scene, butterflies and flowers, but she wasn't coloring it. She was just looking at it. She heard me come over and she looked up and she said, very quietly, "Grandma, am I invisible to them? Not what did I do wrong? Not why didn't they like me? Am I invisible to them?" A 6-year-old child had just asked me if she existed, as far as her own grandparents were concerned. I sat down on the step beside her. I put my arm around her. I said, You are the most visible person in any room you walk into, baby. Don't you ever think otherwise, at you? She leaned into me and went back to looking at the garden picture. After a moment she said, I don't have any pencils for this. I know, I said. We'll fix that. And I meant more than the pencils. That night, after Wren was asleep, and the house had gone quiet, except for the sound of Terrence watching hockey in the living room, and the intermittent laughter from Pauline and Diane cleaning up in the kitchen, I sat at the dining room table with a glass of sparkling water and my phone, and I started making notes. I am an administrative coordinator by trade. Were I suppose, since I'm retired. But 31 years of organizing health unit operations across 3 district offices does things to your brain that don't go away just because you've handed in your key card. You develop a particular relationship with documentation, with timelines, with the simple clarifying act of writing things down and seeing what they actually add up to. So I started writing things down. I didn't start with the gifts. That wasn't really the point, and I knew it. The gifts were the symptom. I started with the loan, $11,000, 3 years ago when Terrence was between jobs after the restructuring at the paper mill. No formal agreement, because Terrence had said, Dorothy, you know we're good for it, and I had said, I know, and we had left it at that, the way Canadians sometimes do. Uncomfortable with the paperwork but deeply uncomfortable with the alternative, which is admitting that maybe the paperwork is necessary. In 3 years, they had repaid $2,000. Not because they were struggling. Terrence had been back at work for 2.5 years, and they had renovated their bathroom the previous spring. They just hadn't gotten around to it. Dorothy didn't push. I also wrote down the truck. Not my truck, the 6 weeks I drove Alistair to work in Chelmsford when his F-150 needed a head gasket and he couldn't afford the repair. 40 minutes each way, twice a day, 6 days a week, 6 weeks. Gas was $1.79 a liter that spring. I calculated what that trip cost me in fuel alone, which came to roughly $420. Not counting my time, not counting the wear on my car. Not counting the 2 times I was late because Alistair was slow getting ready, and I had to sit in the cold in his driveway waiting. I wrote down Maureen's kids. September to December, 3 afternoons a week. I provided after-school care for 2 children, aged 9 and 11 at the time, including snacks, help with homework, transportation twice to orthodontist appointments cause Maureen was in class and couldn't get away. I had done a home care certification course in 2019 for an unrelated reason. The going rate for supervised after-school care in Sudbury at the time was $17 an hour. I looked it up. I had provided approximately 160 hours of it, for free, because Maureen was my sister and she was trying. I kept writing. The time I helped Reg and Diane sort out a problem with their Canada revenue account. They'd received a reassessment notice in 2021. And Diane had called me in a panic, because Reg didn't do the computer stuff. And they weren't sure how to respond. I spent 2 afternoons navigating their My Account portal, gathering documents, drafting their objection letter. I'm not a tax professional, but I'm competent, and I was available, and no one had ever said thank you with anything more substantial than, "You're so good at this stuff, Dorothy." I wrote it all down, every line item I could remember, as specifically as I could remember it. Then I put a rough number next to each one. When I was done, I sat back and looked at the total and I felt something I can only describe as a very cold kind of clarity. Not anger. Something quieter than anger and in some ways more durable. I wasn't owed all of it. Some of it I'd given freely and meant to. But some of it, Alistair's gas, Maureen's childcare, that CRA afternoon that stretched into 2. Some of it had never even been acknowledged. Not thanked, not mentioned, not seen. And the loan, $9,000 of it still outstanding, had simply been absorbed into the background of our family life, like it had always been there, like a piece of furniture everyone has stopped noticing. The next morning I woke up early, before anyone else. And I made coffee and I called Lily into the kitchen. "I want you to see this," I said, and I showed her the notes on my phone. She sat across from me and read. She was quiet for a while, then she looked up and said, "Mom, I know I see it, I've always seen it." I said, "I'm not angry at you, this isn't about you and me." She said, "I know. But I should have." She stopped. She started again. "I should have said something to Terrence's parents about Wren. I should have said it before Christmas. I was afraid of making it awkward and I chose the wrong thing. That's the conversation I think about most, actually. Not the one with Reg and Diane. Not the one with Alistair, which came later and was harder. Lily at the kitchen table on Boxing Day morning, her coffee going cold, admitting that she'd known something was wrong and said nothing. She said it so plainly, without deflecting, and I loved her for it more in that moment than I knew how to say. I want to be careful here, because Lily is not the villain of this story. She isn't any kind of villain. She's a woman in her 30s navigating her own family dynamics, her own in-laws, her own fear of disrupting things. I know that fear. I invented it practically. But Wren is her daughter, and after that morning, things changed between us in a way that felt important. We started talking about it. Really talking. Not just hinting around the edges, and that opened something up that had needed opening for a long time. I did not confront Reg and Diane over Christmas. I want to be clear about that. I'm not built for confrontation in the middle of a holiday dinner when someone else has done the cooking and the children are still awake. What I did was go home, 3 days after Christmas, and write a letter. Not an angry letter, an honest one. Dear Reg and Diane, I wrote. I am writing because I care about this family. And because I believe the people I care about deserve to hear the truth from me directly, rather than through someone else or not at all. I told them what I had noticed about Christmas morning. I told them that Wren had asked me if she was invisible to them. And I told them her exact words. Because I thought they deserved to hear exactly what they had communicated to a 6-year-old child through their choices. I did not tell them they were bad grandparents. I told them they had made her feel small, and that I needed them to know that, and that I was not willing to pretend otherwise. Then I wrote the other part. The part that surprised even me when I was writing it. I told them that I had been reviewing what I've given to this family over the years. Time, money, care, expertise. And that I had come to realize I had never once asked for any of it to be acknowledged or valued. I told them that was partly my fault, for never creating the expectation, but I told them also that I was changing that now. That going forward, I would be setting clearer terms around what I offered and what I expected in return. Not as a threat, as a statement of fact. I mentioned the $9,000 because it was there on the list, and because it was specific and real. I didn't demand immediate repayment. I told them I would be speaking to Terrence about a repayment plan, and that I wanted them to know this was happening. I sealed the letter and mailed it to Barry the same week, because I am 54 years old, and I still believe in sending things through the post when they matter. Diane called me 11 days later. I won't give you every word of that conversation, partly because it lasted 40 minutes, and partly because some of it is still too fresh. But I'll tell you the shape of it. Diane started defensive. She said she hadn't realized there was a difference in the gifts, which I found genuinely hard to believe, and said so gently but clearly. She said Pauline had brought extra things for Hudson and Ivy that she hadn't coordinated with. I said that was possible and I was glad to hear it. And I also said that didn't change how it had landed for Wren, and that what I needed from them wasn't an explanation. It was a change. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected. She said, I don't always know how to talk to Wren. She's so serious. I don't always know how to reach her. I sat with that for a moment. Because here's the thing about being the person who always holds it together. You start to see the things other people are struggling to say. And I could hear, underneath Diane's defensiveness, something that wasn't cruelty. It was awkwardness. It was the specific failure mode of a woman who had been a better grandparent to children she understood, and who had never been honest enough with herself to admit that she needed to try harder with the ones she didn't. That didn't make it okay, but it made it something other than what I'd been afraid it was. I told her, Wren is serious, yes. She's also remarkable. She's curious and methodical, and she has a way of looking at a problem that will take your breath away when she's older. And she is 6, and she just wants to feel like she counts. Diane said, You're right. And then she said it again. You're right. I didn't say anything else about it. I let her sit with it. The repayment conversation with Terrence happened separately, about 3 weeks into January, on a Sunday afternoon when Wren was at a birthday party and Lily was out. He came to my house, which I had asked for specifically. I wanted to be on my own ground. He came in, took off his boots at the door the way he always does. He's particular about that. Always has been. It's one of the things about him I've always liked. and sat at my kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug of tea. He looked like a man who knew what was coming, and had been sitting with it for a while. I told him what I'd told his parents in the letter, in my own words, sitting across the table. I told him the loan had not been forgotten on my end, and that I needed us to put something in writing. A payment schedule, something simple. $150 a month, which over 5 years would cover what was outstanding with a bit more in interest, and which I considered genuinely fair given what I knew of their situation. He didn't argue. He said, "You're right, Dorothy. I've been meaning to." And then he stopped, and I appreciate that he stopped, actually. "I've been meaning to" is where that sentence goes to die, and he knew it, and he closed it off before it got there. He said instead, "I'll have Lily draw something up this week, we'll sign it." They signed it the following Saturday. I have the paper in a folder in my filing cabinet between my utility receipts and my car insurance documents, which is exactly where it belongs. What came after all of this was not, as I sometimes imagined it might be, a grand reckoning or a dramatic falling out. Life doesn't really work that way in my experience, especially not at 54. When you've had enough years to know that most things resolve into something slower and quieter, and more complicated than the confrontation you planned in your head at 2 in the morning. What came instead was a shift. A gradual, real, sometimes awkward shift. Reg called me in February. Not Diane, Reg. That surprised me, because Reg is a man of few words, and those words tend to be about hockey or the condition of his back, or which Tim's location has the freshest coffee in Barrie. All of which are important topics, but not this one. He called and asked if he could take Wren to the Science Museum in Sudbury the next time they were up. "Just Wren," he said. "I want to take her." I said yes, and then I said, "She's been growing her own beans on the windowsills. She has a hypothesis about whether they grow faster in the dark or the light. Maybe you could ask her about it." There was a pause on the line. Then Reg said, "She does?" "She does," I said. "He came up in March. He took her to Science North and they were gone for 3 hours. She came home and told me at full speed about a rock that was 4 billion years old and a tornado simulator, and Grandpa Reg had tried the balance board and fallen off twice, and that had been, she told me with great authority, the best part. I stood in my kitchen doorway and listened to her, and I thought, this is what it was supposed to look like. Not the balance board specifically, though that was genuinely funny. But this, a child feeling counted. Feeling like someone made the effort to see her. Maureen sent me a check in the spring. I hadn't asked for it, and it wasn't what the childcare would have cost at market rate, but it was $350 in an envelope with a card that said, "I've been thinking about how much you did for us, and I don't think I ever really said thank you, and I want to. It's not enough, but it's something." I sat in my car in the parking lot of the post office for about 10 minutes after I opened it. $350 is not the point. The point is the card. The point is, I've been thinking. The point is someone noticing, finally, that something had cost me something and deciding to say so. I called Alistair too, eventually. That one was harder. Because Alistair and I have a 40-year history of him being the one everyone else worries about, and me being the one who doesn't need worrying about. And disrupting that dynamic felt like taking apart a load-bearing wall. But I told him, during a phone call that was supposed to be about something else entirely, that the 6 weeks I'd driven him to Chelmsford had actually been hard on me, and that I'd never said so because I hadn't wanted to make him feel worse about his situation. And he said, "I didn't know that. I honestly didn't know." And then he said, "I'm sorry, Dot. I should have seen it." That's the thing no one tells you about being the reliable one. The people around you aren't always selfish. Sometimes they're just not paying attention because you have made it so easy not to. You've smoothed everything over so thoroughly, for so long, that there's no visible seam left for anyone to notice. You've become load-bearing, and load-bearing things don't get asked how they're doing. Here's what I want to say, to anyone listening who recognizes something of themselves in this. I'm not sorry I helped. I'm not sorry I drove Alistair to work or looked after Maureen's kids or sorted out Reg and Diane's CRA problem. I did those things because I wanted to, and wanting to wasn't a weakness. The weakness, if I'm honest, the thing I'd do differently, was the silence. The assumption that people who loved me could see what it cost me, if they were paying attention. The belief that asking would feel like complaining. Asking is not complaining. Naming what things cost is not an accusation, and a family that loves you should be able to hear the truth about what you've been carrying without falling apart. Wren came home from school last week with a painting she'd made in art class. It was a picture of our family, the way children paint families. Round heads, stick arms, everyone the same height except for the tallest one, which was me. Which she explained was because I was the oldest. I was in the middle, and Wren had painted herself holding my hand on the left, and Lily holding my hand on the right. In the corner, she'd painted two small people she told me were Grandpa Reg and Grandma Diane. Not holding anyone's hand, but there, present, at the edge of the frame. I hung it on my fridge with a magnet shaped like a moose that she'd picked out at a gift shop in Manitoulin 3 summers ago. Progress doesn't always look like a grand moment. Sometimes it looks like a painting taped to a refrigerator with a moose magnet. Sometimes it looks like a grandfather on a balance board. Sometimes it looks like a check in an envelope that says I've been thinking. And sometimes it starts with a little girl sitting on a step, holding a coloring book with no pencils, and asking her grandmother if she is invisible. She isn't. She never was. But now the people who needed to see her are finally learning to look. This is Lyra Payback, because knowing your worth is the first step to asking for it.